Welcome everybody to the 51st episode of Comic DNA, on which we will be discussing Watchmen, both the comic, written by Alan Moore and illustrated by Dave Gibbons, published by DC Comics in 1986, and the film adaptation, directed by Zack Snyder in 2009. Now, I am joined by two very special guests, both of them making their debut on this podcast. First, we have Mr. Kevin LaPorte. Kevin, I apologize, before I started this podcast, I didn't ask, am I pronouncing your name correctly there?
Yeah, you got it right. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. And
Sure.
I'm going to take a stab at our second guest name. We have Mr. Christopher Ochs. Ochs?
No.
I had a feeling.
We gotta get these out of the way beforehand. I guess
know.
That's growing pains.
Yeah, I'm not professional, and I make no claim to be professional. So, Chris...
Here's how this works. It's
Okay.
It's Ochs.
Ochs.
But only in the small region of Germany from whence I have come. Everywhere else it's Ochs, so you're almost right, but still wrong.
I'll take a consolation prize on that one, but it's not good enough. So, well, I'm glad we got that settled. Now, so this is going to be a fun podcast for me because both Kevin and Chris are two comic creators that I have never actually met in person. We only know each other through Facebook, and I can't even remember exactly how that happened. I think it's just one of those things where you slowly accumulate like-minded media on social media, or like-minded people on social media. So all I really know about you guys is that Kevin posts a lot of pictures of G.I. Joes.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What kind of Joes we talking here?
Oh, the classic 80s Joes. And
What's going on over there?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I can get down with that.
and I know that Chris likes to post a lot of pictures of his little dog.
That's true. Yeah, he's actually right here, right now.
And the only other thing I know is that you two are pretty much the only people on my friends list that like all of my cynical libertarian posts and pictures.
Yeah, maybe.
So.
Hold on.
But I do know.
I'm up here in the Portland metro area, just north of Portland, Oregon. So I will tell you that seeing anything that isn't like hardcore 2,000% left wing is just a breath of fresh air. It really is. So if you put anything up like that, it's getting a like from me.
Yeah, and I'm at the bottom of Alabama, Fairhope, right on the Gulf of Mexico. So it's the opposite here.
Man, so we're getting
in the middle.
Two ends of the spectrum here, and I'm right in between you in the middle of America, St. Louis. So we're almost spawning the map here. But I do know that you both make comics in some fashion. So let's do some little introductions before we get to the meaty discussions of Watchmen themselves. Kevin, I see you post a lot running various Kickstarters, and you seem to be pretty busy. What kind of stuff are you working on?
I've been putting out comics for about the past 5 or 6 years under the imprint Inverse Press. We have done 24 Kickstarters since 2010.
Wow.
4 to 5 a year, depending on what we've got going on. And I keep far too many projects on the table. Way too much happening for somebody with a kid and a full-time job. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun. Started off with a comic called Vicious Circus. It's a 104-page graphic novel I did with my partner Amanda Rachel. She's an amazing artist. And then it's grown from there. She did a book. We also published her books with a writer named Erica Heflin, and they've got one called Flesh of White. You can find those. They're on Comixology. They're on our website, inversepress.com. But we've always got something, some new project on the burner.
Well, that's great. I know how it is to get overwhelmed with always having something going on. Sometimes you just can't stop yourself.
Yeah, you meet great artists. I've been lucky to find a real nice harvest of quality artists locally that are also good friends, and you get to talking to those folks and generate ideas, and it's hard to turn around from there when you've got such great artists to work with and such good friends to create new concepts with.
Oh, absolutely. So, Chris, why don't you enlighten me? What kind of stuff have you done, or what are you working on?
I've got the comic of mine you're probably familiar with would be Fantastic Crap Comics.
That is correct.
Which is a comic about a giant squid who solves mysteries, but he's like really bad at his job. Still going.
Yeah, I have read Fantastic Crap Comics, and I thought it was hilarious. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah, there's more of that coming. Issue 6 is in the lettering phase right now. Obviously, I'm the only person at Fantastic Crap, so that it's just me. And it's very time consuming, obviously.
Sure.
So the lettering phase is going on. Issue 6 should be up shortly. But I always wanted Fantastic Crap to be more like a variety magazine than just a straight comic. So there's other projects associated with that as well. I do a lot of film reviews and film essays that get published there and other places. But the biggest project I'm doing right now is I'm working on my second book, which we don't have a title at this point, but it's about the underground German splatter film movement of the late 80s and early 90s. And it is, to my knowledge, the only book written on this topic thus far.
All right.
So that's good. Yeah. But it has been just a bitch of a project to research. These people are often I swear they're in hiding almost. But yeah, so I'm working on that quite a bit. That's going well, and that's what I got.
That's good. So you do a lot of film reviews. So you're kind of, maybe you describe yourself as a little bit of like a cinephile. You really like film?
I'm a film essayist and historian, particularly for psychotronic media.
Okay. Well, then I think this podcast is something that you might have a lot to talk about, because we're not just talking about comics. We're talking about this famous, some would say infamous, film adaptation.
So really quick, I should mention I've written a lot about Watchmen before. So if anyone listening has read anything I've read, you might notice I'm pretty much going to word things exactly the same as I've written them. And that's just because I literally don't know a better way to say it. So I might be rehashing myself a little bit. But...
That's perfectly fine, because it'd probably be new to me and new to Kevin. So
yeah.
It's all right. It's all right. So now when I put out this call on Facebook of friends, comic book making friends that wanted to discuss this comic versus the film, you two were you two were both pretty enthusiastic about it. I don't know, Kevin, you don't sound like a super enthusiastic dude in general, but Christopher does.
I got shit to say.
Now, what I found really interesting though was Kevin. Correct me if I'm wrong. You said you liked the movie. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did like it.
Okay, well that is going to make for an interesting discussion. But I don't want to keep putting the discussion off too long though, because I did kind of want to talk briefly about the comic first and just kind of set up some context of what we're discussing. Because the thing with the Watchmen is that I personally have put off talking about it on this podcast for a long time, because I don't know if there's anything I could actually say about the comic, the graphic novel, that hasn't been said a million times over. I mean, the book is 30 years old. I don't think it's unfair to say it's probably the most discussed and praised superhero comic of all time. And I don't just mean praised by a bunch of fanzines or internet chat rooms. And I don't even just mean industry recognition like Kirby Awards and Eisner Awards. I mean it gets recognition outside of the industry. It won a Hugo Award. It was on Time Magazine's 100 Greatest Novels list, the only comic to appear on that list. So this is kind of it's a book that carries a lot of baggage with it, because it's always kind of the go-to number one greatest comic book ever, a graphic novel ever made. So before we start talking about this adaptation and the film versus the comic and everything that entails, I kind of want to know what your guys' just general stance is on the book itself. As for myself, I like The Watchmen quite a bit. I think it's a really great book. I don't know if I would say it's my favorite Alan Moore book. It was probably the, I don't know, third or fourth Alan Moore book that I read. But I would still consider it, along with the other Moore books I read, a very important book for me in my, like, comics history, my personal comics history. I read a lot of comics as a kid, and Alan Moore was one of the first creators that really kind of opened my eyes to what comics could be. They could be more than just simple comics. And I came to him as a teenager. I was reading these books, and it kind of blew me away. So it is an important book to me, but I don't know I don't know exactly if I would put it in the greatest book ever created category. Where do you guys stand on that one? Whoever wants to just jump on that question first.
Well, for me, I can only speak for the volume of comics that I've read. And it's certainly the greatest in my opinion for what I've read. And similar to you, I ran across Watchmen, I guess like my junior or senior year in high school, and it was just coming off of reading mainstream comics primarily, and I was just starting to discover other things. I mean, we didn't have a comic shop for most of that time, and when we finally did, I walk in, it's the week that issue 12 came out, and the friend that gave me a ride out there was telling me about Watchmen. I didn't know what it was, hadn't heard of it before, and he loaned me the trade when it came out a couple years later, and it blew my mind. I mean, I'd never read anything like it. And I just started exploring other things like martial law, for example, an epic comic, which is certainly edgy and kind of groundbreaking in its own right. But yeah, Watchmen, it's a whole different type of story from what I was used to. It felt kind of, edgy, kind of dark compared with other things, and made you think about things in different ways than the usual comics.
I agree, yeah. Christopher, where do you, what, let me put this in a really psychobabble kind of a phrased question. What does Watchmen mean to you?
Yeah, that is a psychobabbly type of little...
Or you can just answer it however you want.
No, I'll take a stab at that. I do think I think it's a masterpiece for sure. I think it's brilliant. I definitely got a lot out of it. That having been said, I don't know if I got more out of that book than I got from other books. I think that, for me personally, the single most influential graphic novel for me personally that I've ever had was Surfing the Highway, the Sam and Max compendium, and that's just because, for whatever reason, the way Steve Purcell writes and draws really, really speaks to me.
Sure.
So for me, that's the deepest end of comics for me. But that having been said, clearly there's a lot more to Watchmen than there is to Sam and Max comics. I think that's more just my subjective take on it. So
sure.
What I get from Watchmen, I don't think is really a good barometer for what we as an audience just in general can get from it. I think that its reputation is well deserved, and most people are aware that it's treated like serious literature. I think that's completely appropriate. I think it's groundbreaking. But then again, at the same time, in a very deeply subjective way, I don't know that... I mean, even something like Dark Knight Returns, like, maybe for me was as impactful as Watchmen. Those are two series that have some shared themes that kind of together for me a lot in a lot of ways. I think that objectively, Watchmen is certainly better, but subjectively, what it means to me... waters are a little muddier.
I can understand that.
That's for psychobabbly type response.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
So, as I mentioned earlier, Kevin, you said you liked the film. Christopher, I don't think we kind of implied it earlier, but I take it you're not a big fan of the film or Zack Snyder in general.
I think Zack Snyder should be used for medical research. I think we should use medicine on him that might not be safe, and then when he dies, we should just throw him in a dumpster. But as for the movie, I think the Watchmen movie is incredible because at the same time, it is a painfully faithful reproduction of the comic and simultaneously the exact opposite of the comic's intentions. And I think it's incredible that is achievable And it's only achievable because Zack Snyder has an enthusiasm for the source material, but absolutely no understanding of it beyond the most superficial surface layer of the composition. He doesn't get it. He thinks he's supposed to like it, so he does, but he doesn't actually understand it. So what we get is this crazy version of Watchmen that achieves both almost like a line-for-line reinterpretation of the book and exactly the opposite of what it was supposed to actually mean, which is just mind-blowing.
I mean, I have to agree with you, Christopher. I'm trying to stay as level-headed about this as possible because I don't want Kevin to feel like we're ganging up on him for liking the film.
Don't worry about that.
Oh, good. That's good.
Kevin, I like you. I like you, dude. I don't want to act like a dick to you. This is radio, so.
Absolutely. And I have to admit, I rewatched the Watchmen movie today, just before this podcast, so it's really fresh in my memory. And I haven't seen it since I saw it in theaters when it came out. And I have to admit that the film enrages me.
Wow.
I don't like to admit that I have these kind of emotional responses, but basically I completely agree with everything Christopher said. It's like a funhouse mirror version of the book.
You know what I think is the best way to say it? I think it's like a parrot. It repeats exactly what you say, but in this weird monotone so that none of the intonation and none of the actual intention is identical. That's what it is. Like, this is like a parrot is reading back Watchmen.
I was going to say it's like a porn parody of the Watchmen with almost not enough sex. Like, there's still a lot of sex in there, but it's not quite enough to be like a real porn parody.
I 200% think I would respect a porn parody of the Watchmen more. I absolutely believe that. The people involved, except for Jackie Earle Haley. Jackie Earle Haley cast as Rorschach, I think, is actually genius. I think he's the perfect actor for that part. And that is a sum total, absolute, end of the sentence list of things I have good to say about Watchmen. Jackie Earle Haley, the rest, no.
I can agree to that, actually. I liked Jackie Earle Haley. I thought, in fact, I think this. So this is one of the questions I was getting. I don't want to get like again. I want to let Kevin have a little bit of a say here, but I think one of the things that makes people that really love this film, because this is the other thing, I guess that's an important thing to note, that there are people that really love this film. Like, everybody talks about how this is a divisive film. Like, there are people like me that have this negative emotional, like, humongous negative emotional reaction to it. And there are people that are praising it as, like, the smartest, greatest superhero film ever made. I have to admit, taking a step back, I am very fascinated by that development of this film, that this film can have like polarized reactions to it like that. But I think the biggest reason that a lot of people like the film is the character of Rorschach. And without getting too far into the weeds, I do think that Rorschach is probably the one single aspect of the film that is most faithful to the comic, and I still think they don't get it 100% right. But Kevin, Chris and I have ranted for a few minutes here. So you say you like the film. I mean, what do you like about it? Like, do you like it as an adaptation? Do you like it as a standalone film?
I like it okay as an adaptation, and that's not to deny the points you guys have made. I mean, I couldn't counter them particularly with such passion. But I don't disagree that there's valid points. But just from the standpoint of entertainment, I enjoy watching the movie. I do like Rorschach. I think that's a good point, that a lot of people that like the movie do like it because of Rorschach. But I think a lot of people like the comic like it because of Rorschach. And I don't think they translate everything accurately from the Rorschach in the comic, but I don't need that. Mm-hmm. I'm not looking for it to be a faithful adaptation. To go from comic to movie, particularly from a volume as dense, like literally and metaphorically as Watchmen, you're not going to be able to get everything right or get it in there. but from the standpoint of just as a consumer, it was a great film to me. It was fun to watch. I liked the style that he used, from the opening credits to the fight scenes and even the exaggerated physical abilities of the characters compared with the comics. It made for a fun watch, an enjoyable watch. And the necessary change at the end with the nuclear attack versus the psychic squid. And I think that's just a choice as to what's going to look better, what's going to feel more authentic in this story as a film versus what Moore did based on one of the old was it not Twilight Zone, but one of the types of shows.
It was Outer Limits.
Outer Limits, that's right.
Which is referenced in the original comic.
Sure.
Well, I mean, it's even in the movie. They do the little Outer Limits thing.
We should totally throw out a spoiler warning thing here.
Oh yeah.
I don't think we. In order to discuss this, we just have to spoil the shit out of it.
Yeah. There's really no way to get around that.
For real, if you haven't read it, haven't seen it, and don't want it spoiled, just get out of here now.
Right. There's really no other way to talk about it. But I do think, Kevin, you bring up a fair point, which is that and this is kind of something that always gets brought up when you talk about adaptations. I don't think the film needs necessarily to be a faithful adaptation of the book to be a good movie. I will concede that point 100%. Because there are adaptations that I've seen that I like more than the source material. There are adaptations I've seen that I don't care about the source material, but I like the movie. And there are some that I like both the original source material and the movie, despite them being different. I think they both work as standalone, media. So I agree with you, and I think it's completely fair to, enjoy the film despite whether or not it's a faithful adaptation. I don't think that that's necessarily a fair criticism to lob at the film, quote, necessarily, but I do think it becomes this weird thing where it's sort of impossible to talk about what makes a good adaptation and when is it okay to alter things and not alter things, because you kind of get into that thing of everything that made this book great that makes me want to see the movie is not in the movie. So I think you reach a point at which if the reason people are watching is because of its association with the source material, but you're going to deviate from the source material so much that they can't possibly get what they would expect going in, right, then
all you're really doing is trying to get asses in seats.
Right.
That's something to think about. Although I also agree with you, faithfulness to source material isn't the end all be all grading scale for whether or not something is a good movie.
Yeah, but I think the reason that people disagree so much is that what they were looking for in the adaptation is different from person to person. So if what was important to one of you isn't showing up in the adaptation or it's bastardized in some way, that's upsetting or disappointing or whatever. You're not going to like it. But if other people do see things that they're enjoying that they liked in the comic translated in some awesome way to the movie, then they're going to like it a lot more. And I think that's where the divisiveness comes in.
Yes, I agree, and that's what I find so interesting about both the praise and criticism of the Watchmen film is that a lot of people criticize it for the same exact things that people are praising it for.
Sure.
So there's a sense of the people that love it are saying it's great because of this, and this, and the people that are hated are saying, yeah, that and that is in the movie, and that's why I hate it. So I
think it's just a situation where the idea of Watchmen, really, beyond the stories and the themes, the idea was taking these well-worn tropes of superheroes that were at that point just as stale as you could possibly get, and then subjecting them to unheard of levels of realism. And that was brand new. That was this new shocking thing. And so to take that and then smear over it this glossy, cliche, slow motion fight scene, glittery costume nonsense is such a and just in every way the antithesis of the intention. And I think for me, that's the whole thing. It's like there's not a trace of irony in it. It's like we took this thing that exists because it's about subjecting superheroes to realism, and then we went the exact opposite direction with it. And so how are we possibly going to get a sizable chunk of the audience to agree on something that just bizarre and wacky?
Which is probably the same reason that Moore hates it, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, that, and he is old and grumpy and hates all things.
He changes his mind here and there, but yeah.
Yeah. I think by the time Watchmen came out, he had pretty much already dug into his anti-social, anti-industry rut. I heard
He's grading homework at Hogwarts.
Yeah.
Too.
I heard an interview.
A lot.
I heard an interview with Alan Moore where he was kind of joking and very jovial about the whole situation, about how he just doesn't have anything to do with the film adaptations, and he doesn't accept the money that's given to him. Like for royalties for the adaptation, I guess, according to the contract that he gets, and he just gives it to the artists that work on the book. And I think he was laughing about it. Because he said, like, the first time he did it, because he was enraged. I think it was League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Just enraged him that he got drawn into this BS Hollywood legal lawsuit over, the copyright infringement over, the adaptation. Like, something that he had nothing to do with, and they were dragging him to court. He was just mad. And the film was awful, so he didn't want anything to do with it. And then I think V for Vendetta also enraged him because he told him he didn't want anything to do with it. And then they publicly said he supported them, and he so he's like, I want nothing to do with it. I'm tired of people trying to drag me into it. And he made a joke where he was like, the first time I rejected the money it was because I was mad and I made a principled stand, and then I sort of realized that I would have to keep doing that every time it happened. Otherwise, he made a joke about how he sort of stuck himself, to where he could no longer accept the money no matter what. Otherwise, he would, appear like some kind of hypocrite, which he was definitely afraid of. So it was actually very similar to the humor that you find in Watchmen, which is another thing about how much I love the comedian and Alan Moore's, almost his nihilistic humor, like the fatalistic, this is where we are, and I can do nothing but laugh at it despite how terrible it is. I thought that was really interesting, how that's just who he is. He was in an interview, that's just how he was.
Yeah.
But
that speaks to me too. He does.
Yeah, me too. Sometimes I think Alan Moore is my spirit animal. I'm not even successful in any way, and I already want to just cut myself off from society. But that kind of brings up something we were touching on, this concept of being faithful to the comic. And Alan Moore himself has said that the comic is unfilmable. And I can see how and why he would say that, because the comic is so dense. There's so many layers to it. You would have to make it a new thing if you wanted to make a film out of it. And at that point, it's somebody like Moore, as far as he's concerned, then it's not Watchmen. It's a new thing. Just make a new thing. But what drives me crazy about this film, and it's basically, I'm worried that I'm going to start repeating myself here, is the way people, even in the criticism, where people talk about how maybe it's not a great movie, they say, everybody agrees, the people that love the film and the people that criticize and dislike the film, they say that it's too faithful to the comic. I don't know where that comes from. I can't see it being too faithful to the comic. Am I completely out of left field here?
I got something to say here, right? This exacting. Okay. I think it's too faithful in the comic because it's defeating the attitude of the actual movie. Mm-hmm. Because, again, it's the same thing we were talking about before. The spirit of Watchmen, the comic, is A, and the spirit of Watchmen, the movie, is Z. Mm-hmm. And when the two are trying to work together, you don't get both, you get neither.
Right.
And that's kind of what I think is going on. I think if the movie Zack Snyder wanted to make was the movie we saw, he would be better served to abandon a lot of these things that aren't really serving the movie he wants to make, really. He just keeps them because, one, he's afraid to discard that much of the source material because of how revered it is, and two, because he's not smart enough to know what he's dealing with. So it's like if you're building a shelf and you understand the way shelves work, like you're like, oh, I don't need this thing. But if you're building a shelf and you don't know how shelves work, you're like, well, I better follow the directions exactly because damn, this shelf could explode or something. Like he's doing. He's like, he's got Watchmen. He's like, I don't know how this works. I better do it exactly like the book because otherwise it's just going to collapse on me. So he keeps all this stuff he doesn't actually need because it doesn't actually work towards what he wants. That's what I think they're trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of how I feel about it too. When people say it's too faithful to the comic, I see like the character designs. Like Rorschach, I think this, again, going back to like why people like it, Rorschach's like the only one who looks like he looks in the comic because it's such a great design. Like it really is like a perfect character design. And everybody else is just kind of all over the place. Like there's like weird creative choices made where they don't, like in this instance with Rorschach, we're going to be too faithful to the comic. But, you know, with Ozymandias, you know, it's just, let's just make him a parody of Joel Schumacher's Batman with nipples on the costume because, and I can't, I guess what I'm saying is like where you have these deviations from the source material, I can't fathom why these decisions are being made. Because to me, they don't work at all, even in the context of it just being a standalone movie, not an adaptation.
I think he just does not understand, and he just kind of looks and he just shrugs and says, what the fuck? Sure, put nipples on the costume. I don't know what to do. Like, he doesn't know what he's doing. But the comparison to Batman and Robin is eerie because even during the trailers, like the song they played for the trailers is the beginning is the end by Smashing Pumpkins, which is just a slowed down version of The Beginning is the End is the Beginning, which is the song Smashing Pumpkins did for the Batman and Robin soundtrack. And when I saw that, I was like, so you're trying to send us the message that this is Batman and Robin, but slower? Like, that's the vibe the trailer was telling me, which was alarming and terrifying.
I do think I do think that Zack Snyder was trying to go for more of a I guess you could call it a superhero film deconstruction. I've seen people say that make this point where like whereas the Watchmen comic is a deconstruction of the history of superhero comics, the Watchmen movie is a deconstruction of superhero movies. I don't know if I buy that.
I don't.
Here's something. I'm going to point this out over and over throughout the remainder of this conversation. I think the frustration and the lapse in understanding happens at this one spot, and that is that we are trying to give Zack Snyder way more credit than he deserves. Because really, we're looking at it and saying, but why is he doing this? Why is he doing this? And the answer is simply because he doesn't fucking know what he's doing. He doesn't get it. Doesn't know. And that's what it is. It's not any more complicated than that. We're not dealing with an intelligent person.
I have to,
get it. And we're trying to like inject all of this deeper meaning into these decisions that are either arbitrary or just him saying, what the fuck? I don't know. Like, that's all it is, I think.
I mean, I have to agree. I'm trying really hard not to make too many attacks on Zack Snyder, but I mean, I do agree with you, Chris. I don't like any of his films. I don't.
know I'm hogging up all the time.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Really quick, I need to say something there too because I try to avoid personal attacks as well, but Zack Snyder to me opened himself up to this because when Terry Gilliam was approached to do Watchmen and he said he wanted to do it, he said if he did it, he would do it as like maybe a television series, which I think would have been a good idea. Yeah. Zack Snyder said one of the reasons he made Watchmen was to, quote, save it from the Terry Gilliams of the world. And when someone like Zack Snyder makes a statement like that, to me, that is displaying a level of arrogance that makes him personally detestable on a personal level. So I think at that point, usually I would try to avoid personal attacks, but not in the case of Snyder. All bets are off for me on that.
I'm kind of the same way. Snyder really, he just evokes a negative, passionate response from me on a personal level. Like I try to be fair to him, but I really, I look at his films and I agree with you. I think people give him too much credit. I don't think he's as smart as he pretends to be, and I find just maybe it's just like a personal thing and it's just who I am, but I find that so offensive on a personal level. Maybe it is, everybody's right and I'm just a jealous hater. As a creator, I just hate him, but I'm a hater.
He's the Rob Liefeld of Haifa.
Yeah,
Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
He's the Rob Liefeld of Hollywood. Put that on my tombstone. That's the truth.
Yeah.
So can you imagine what this movie would have looked like made by Gilliam now? I can't imagine.
It would have been radically different from the source material, I think, but I think it still would have gotten across the actual spirit of the piece. That's what I think.
And I think we're just at that point we're also seeing getting back to it being a matter of taste though. I've never gotten through a Terry Gilliam movie, and that's just they put me to sleep. I don't have anything against him as a creator, and it's not something I've ever really thought about consciously, but sitting here talking about it, I've never made it through one. And so I just think it, at the end of the day, boils down to individual taste and how those line up with whoever's doing the creating.
Sure enough. I also think that if we had a Terry Gilliam film version of Watchmen or a TV show Watchmen, it would be sort of like a coin toss, like a 50-50. Is this going to be like the really great altogether Terry Gilliam, or is this going to be the off the rails, surreal, only makes sense inside of his head Terry Gilliam?
Like if David Lynch
get done. That's the question. Would the production just implode and fall apart?
Right, exactly. Yeah, would it even have gotten finished?
Yeah.
Because he's been trying to make that Don Quixote movie for like 20 years.
Yeah, I know. I think he tried again recently.
But Michael Palin. I think he cast Michael Palin as Don Quixote. I think that was announced.
How many actors who've played Don Quixote have just died of old age?
Right, exactly.
The answer's not zero, folks.
Yeah, exactly.
But at some point, they're going to make a Jodorowsky's Dune-style documentary about that movie.
Right.
They did. Yeah. Called Lost in La Mancha.
Lost in La Mancha. I watched that. Yep, I did because he filmed scenes with Johnny Depp for the movie.
Yeah.
It
Johnny
started
Depp
filming.
And John Rochefort.
Yep. Yeah. But I think going with this Terry Gilliam version of Watchmen versus Zack Snyder's version of Watchmen, I think this kind of goes into back to the what makes a good adaptation. I don't really care whether or not, like you said, Kevin, a Terry Gilliam Watchmen would have deviated from the source material quite a bit. I think one of the ideas I saw tossed around was the ending. It would end with a bunch of cosplayers imagining themselves in the movie, which is that has nothing to do with the original source material, per se. But I do wonder, if I don't care about deviating from the source material so much as that it gets the inherent tone and themes of the original story correctly, which I think that's what makes the Zack Snyder movie so detestable to me, because people who say that it's too close to the source material, all they see is Rorschach repeating the lines almost verbatim, but they don't understand how tonally the movie is completely different from the comic. Just the way it's so overly violent in Zack Snyder's overly violent way. And a lot of people will hear me say that, and they will say, well, what are you talking about? The original graphic novel, is very violent. But it's not presented in the same way as in the film. In the book, Rorschach is really violent, yes. But it doesn't dwell, and in my opinion, it doesn't, what's the word I'm thinking of? It doesn't glamorize the violence the way the film does, with Zack Snyder's constant, slow motion style where we, hang on all of the gory details. One of the things that I like so much about the book, and this is something that I like about Alan Moore's style in general, is his ability to tell a story in a very almost plain, matter-of-fact way. And he's trying, it's almost like he's trying really hard not to manipulate you into feeling a certain way about the events that are happening. He's just trying to present the events in a structurally significant way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like in the comic, when there is violence, it almost feels like you're walking by a house and you look in the window and you happen to see a murder.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but in the movie, it's like, oh, here's a murder through the filter of The Matrix or something like that. Yeah. We're not supposed to ever think, oh, wow, this is really cool. I think that if someone had directed the Watchmen movie in a way that was faithful to the intentions of Alan Moore, the character of Rorschach would have been handled a lot more scary and menacing.
Mm-hmm.
What he would have done would have made us feel more uncomfortable. It would have been uglier and scarier.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's actually, this is the scene that I always bring up when I complain about this movie. I
think I know what you're going to say. Say it.
Well, okay, so it's the presentation of Rorschach being like a scary, violent guy, and all the other superheroes in the movie being equally violent, but nobody acts like they're as violent. So it's the scene where Night Owl and Sally and Dan, they get mugged by the Knot Tops. I can't stand that scene. In the book, they get mugged and they beat up the guys, right? It's like a page, maybe 2 pages, 9-panel grid on each of just them like punching people, and I'm not saying it's not violent. It is violent. Like they get into a violent altercation. But the movie, it's not a violent altercation. I can't think of her name. I was trying to think of her.
Malin Ackerman.
Yeah. So like her her character
Silk Spectre.
Yes, Silk Spectre. Thank you. I don't know why. I kept yeah, thank you. Anyway, okay, so Silk Spectre, they're getting into this fight, and like you see Dan like slow motion break a guy's arm and the bone shoots out. And you see her stab a guy in the neck with a knife. You see her twist a guy's head around. I mean, this isn't just like violent, like a violent fight. Like just straight up killing people in very, very violent ways. That is how everybody talks about Rorschach when they're on their date and they're talking about Rorschach, or they're talking about that guy who pretended to be a supervillain because he had a fetish for getting beat up, and then they're laughing and they're like, oh, what happened to that guy? And he's like, oh, he tried that on Rorschach and Rorschach dropped him down an elevator shaft. That's supposed to be a funny moment because Rorschach is the extreme. Rorschach is the crazy one who will kill people, and then you get to the violent part where they're just, defending themselves and they are killing people. It doesn't mesh. Like, it's not, like the way the characters talk about each other doesn't mesh with what we're seeing them do. And that's always bothered me, like, a lot. There are a lot of other scenes that bother me. Christopher, what scene did you think I was going to say?
I thought you were going to say, which is my favorite moment in the comic. Rorschach's, I'm not stuck in here with you, you're stuck in here with me. When he's in the prison. And I think that to me is the best moment in the comic.
Mm-hmm.
But in the movie, it's like, okay, when I saw it read in the comic, I thought we were dealing with like a Hannibal Lecter moment. Like,
yes,
this is meant to be very scary. But in the movie, it's not Hannibal Lecter. It's more like Clint Eastwood. It's like, check it out, I'm an old badass, and I'm gonna like kick. I'm gonna, it was just dealt so differently. And to me, that really feels like a really, really active illustration of where the two are so different, tonally.
And in the comic, that line was actually delivered. He was off panel.
Right.
I think it's actually.
It was the psychiatrist or the therapist. He's the one. He's the one who says the line, writing in his notes. You never actually, like, Rorschach never says it. You never see him say it.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's a few moments like that where they pull it to the character to have an action scene, and that one's particularly brutal.
Yeah.
Admittedly brutal. But it's a chance to throw hot grease on somebody on screen.
Well, and that's kind of another thing about how, like, the book is violent. I'm not, we talked about this, but it's like the movie has to make it extra violent for, in my opinion, no real reason other than for Zack Snyder to just prove how brutal he is.
For fun.
Yeah,
That's
for fun.
it.
It's supposed to be for fun, which goes back to it's glamorizing the violence. It doesn't feel, it's not plausible, it's not plausible dark human darkness. Like the whole reason Rorschach is because he's seen the awful, awful things people do to each other. But then in the movie, people are doing awful things to each other because it's fun. The freaking prisoner gets his arms sawed off. Instead of just, getting stabbed and electrocuted, because it's more brutal for a guy to get his arms sawed off while he's still alive, because that scene is it's just got to be more brutal. You can't just kill him. Things like, it's like every like violent altercation that happens in the comic, the scene is stretched out so much. And I think that bothers me so much because we're dealing with such a dense story, and there's so much to have to compress to fit into a 3-hour movie, a long movie, and it's got like a solid 30 minutes of superfluous slow motion fight scenes, like stuff that's better real estate that could be used for something else.
I feel like the thing that bothers me about it so much, and why I think that it would have been better as a TV show, is because I wish there was more time to just be meditative and just like get into smaller nuances of how people are and discussions, and like more walking through the streets and seeing Rorschach in the background, but you don't know it's him yet, because he's playing the homeless, the signs. But instead, we don't have any time for that. We don't have any time to actually build a world or try to let things breathe. But we do have a shitload of time for 360-degree slow motion karate chops.
Yeah.
Like, I think that just really proves that, again, Snyder doesn't get it.
Yeah, I mean,
I think they were trying to make something to get people into the theater, as you mentioned before, without a doubt. And there's no question that like a one-season HBO series would probably adapt it more, faithfully than what he did or what he was trying to do. If you're trying to get more of a accurate look at how the characters develop over the course of the story and get all of those arcs intact. But
I think this is another important distinction to make, and this again tying into what we've all been saying. Yeah, sure, a TV show would be, you'd have more room to make a more faithful adaptation, but I also think that that's sort of a moot point. It's not, because going back to that whole like whether or not it's a faithfully adaptation from the book doesn't really matter as long as it's a good movie in and of itself. And I think some of these criticisms kind of get tangled up into each other. Like, is it a criticism of the film, or is it a criticism for just not being able to do what a TV show could do with the source material? So sometimes I think it's a little unfair to complain about the movie for not being a TV show. It's a movie. That's what it is. However, what I've been saying is a criticism of it being a movie. When you only have 3 hours to tell a story, I think it's incredibly foolish to waste time on, like, as I said, all this superfluous slow motion action. Now, somebody that likes all the superfluous slow motion action wouldn't necessarily think it's superfluous, and that's where you can have a difference of opinion. I think it's also important to remember that this movie came out, Zack Snyder's style was really, really popular, which is not to say that he's still not popular to some degree. I never did see any of the Man of Steel or Batman vs Superman, but I know that he's not quite as universally beloved as he was like at the time when 300 came out, which I think this film he made after 300.
I think so.
So
it was Dawn of the Dead, 300, and then Watchmen.
Right, and Sucker Punch was in there somewhere too. Maybe
Sucker Punch comes after Watchmen.
Okay, yeah, Sucker Punch was sort of like the first cracks, I think, where a lot of
Sucker Punch is literally the worst movie I've ever seen. I own a copy of Fart the movie on DVD. I honestly. And Sucker Punch is literally the worst thing I've ever seen. I will watch anything. I've watched dark stuff, you guys. Like really, really dark stuff. Bad stuff you gotta like order from like shady dudes in Indonesia. I ain't watching that. Sucker Punch, it does not get more bleak and depressing than Sucker. And I don't mean bleak and depressing as in the content. I mean, a human made this.
Right. Something
with a genetic similarity to me made this and thought it was good. What does that reflect on me? Could I be in any way similar to whatever thing dredged this up? Like, Sucker Punch is the worst movie I have ever seen.
Sucker Punch was the film that really made me question, stop giving Zack Snyder the benefit of the doubt. Like, when Watchmen came out, everybody was kind of hailing him as, he makes good adaptations. He did the remake of Dawn of the Dead, which everybody liked, which I don't like. He did 300, which I don't necessarily like, but I personally am not a huge fan of Frank Miller. And then he did Watchmen, which everybody was, is another fantastic adaptation from Zack Snyder. And I didn't like the film, and I couldn't figure out why everybody was always praising him for being this really smart director. And then Sucker Punch came out, and he was like doing interviews talking about it being this real like female empowering smart film. And then nobody could give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. Everybody was just like gobsmacked, just slack-jawed and confused over what the heck is this film compared to what he's apparently thinks it is, the way he talks about it.
Yeah, that's what's so mind-boggling. It's like he really like had just a smug smile, like he thought he just dredged up the most psychologically like
yeah
work ever, and it literally feels like you're watching your little brothers and your little brother's friends play Xbox 360 for like 2 hours. The card game Solitaire has more character development than Sucker Punch does.
Yeah, it's I don't.
You get into the motivations for like the Six of Diamonds, more than the lead character in Sucker Punch.
Yeah, I don't think Sucker Punch has too many defenders. I'm sorry, Kevin, I didn't give you a chance. Do you like Sucker Punch?
I do, actually.
If I ever meet you, dude, I'm gonna buy you like lunch or something. I feel like a dick.
No, I don't take anything personally. These are opinions.
Sure, absolutely.
It's just spectacle, and it's not something I'm prepared to defend or really care enough about to defend. But it's a pretty film. Lots of interesting things going on visually, but it is just spectacle. I mean, I don't disagree about the character arcs necessarily.
I'm so happy. I'm just happy for you, Kevin. I mean, because like we could get into a greater discussion of just like what makes something entertaining, because I like so many things for so many different reasons,
Sure.
And I think we are all pretty much in agreement. I don't hold anybody. I would never hold it against somebody for liking things that they like. It is what it is. But we're not here to talk about Sucker Punch or all the movies that Kevin likes that Christopher and I hate. We're just gonna talk
like a podcast, though. We could do like a regular thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. The Snyder guys.
Kevin.
The Snyder fulcrum.
Yeah. Kevin stands alone. Solitary defender.
That's not a bad idea.
Got something, but yeah. I mean, as far as Watchmen, I just don't know. I would like to see it. I don't know. I am somebody who I don't really care about adaptations very often. There have been a lot of TV show adaptations of comics lately, and I haven't watched the Preacher show. I watched 2 episodes of the iZombie show on the CW, and we did a podcast about it, and I had a kind of an embarrassing meltdown rant over how awful the show is compared to the comic. Similar to what's going on here, but it was just...
I didn't even know iZombie was a comic.
Oh, yeah. Mike Allred. Yeah.
I must not know what's going on anymore, you guys.
It's the show is not... we could almost transcribe very similar this discussion we're having about Zack Snyder's adaptation of Watchmen to the CW's adaptation of iZombie, because there is not an ounce of the comic.
I just can't believe that the CW didn't bring us quality credit.
I know, right?
I don't know if I believe you.
Scout's honor. But I actually, though, I mean, not to just make comparisons, but I actually found, despite me ranting about how awful of an adaptation it was, I do find it the iZombie adaptation, I find it less offensive to me than the Watchmen adaptation. And I think it just is because it has the Watchmen adaptation has this weird, true to the source material but completely wrong attitude. Whereas like something like the iZombie show, clearly they're not trying to be really true to the source material. They're just taking the broad idea of what the comic was and they're making a show out of it. Watchmen doesn't do that. Watchmen, it's bizarre.
Could it also be because you care more about Watchmen?
That's possible. I do genuinely really like the iZombie comic. I've done 3 podcasts on the whole series. I think it's a fantastic comic. I love Mike Allred. It's wildly imaginative and it looks great and it's really fun. I would recommend it to anybody. But that being said, you might be right, because I wouldn't say it's nearly as quote important or as, you know, literature masterpiece that is Watchmen. I do think that Watchmen kind of, it does maybe bring a little something more from me, just because like it, again, what we've talked about, like not only what it is and what it does and why it's great, but it does mean something to me. It was a book that I read in my formative years, you know, so on and so forth. So that's fair enough. I can concede that.
Yeah, same for me. I just had an opposite reaction to the film. Mm-hmm. And I think I wanted to really like it, because I love that book so much, and it meant so much to me in adolescence, you know, when I was just discovering a lot of these ideas, and particularly in comic art in general. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, I wanted to like the film too. I mean, I saw the movie before I decided I disliked Zack Snyder. So I really did, when I saw the movie, I really did kind of go into it with not necessarily a blank slate, because I was very skeptical that the book could be turned into a movie. But it's not the same as if I went into, like, even just like Batman vs Superman now. If I sit down and watch Batman vs Superman, I am going to be in a very very critical frame of mind from the get-go. And I'm going to not be very accommodating to the film. Just because
Deservedly so.
Yeah, exactly. Like everything I've seen about it, it's been almost 10 years now since I sort of, like, I've had 10 years, almost 10, like, you know, like 7 or 8 years to sort of like develop and harbor feelings about Zack Snyder and let them fester. And I didn't have that when I first saw The Watchmen, though. I've been trying really hard this whole podcast not to say the phrase "watched Watchmen." it's awkward.
Well, who will watch The Watchmen? Who watches The Watchmen?
Kevin, apparently.
Just me.
Just Kevin. So I don't want to keep running around in circles talking about, like, you know, how terrible it is or how great it is or how well it succeeds. I think you could pick out a million different scenes in the comic that are just weirdly misinterpreted in the movie, and not just, I mean, some stuff obviously is going to be compressed, you know, to fit the story structure of a film. You could go around and around. Let's just talk about the ending. Let's just discuss whether or not, because that's sort of the one thing that everybody always, like, yes, it's really faithful except for the ending, because of course the ending has to be changed. Now this whole last, like, probably almost an hour now that Christopher and I have been ranting, I would make the case that it's not faithful. But, you know, when people talk about it, they say it's really faithful except for the ending, which most people, I think, it's another one of those things where people agree that the ending is better changed for the film. Kevin, as the guy who's been graciously putting up with Christopher and me just railing on this film, as somebody who likes it, how do you feel about the ending of the film?
I think it's fine. I don't know that you gain anything by bringing in the psychic squid. It's such an odd concept that comes through in the comic because of the reference. But in the movie, I mean, we've talked about the different way it's paced, with the action scenes taking up more of the space, and you know that squid's gonna come out of nowhere and be like, "What the hell? What are we doing here?" But the build up to Dr. Manhattan being, you know, the reason for this nuclear holocaust or nuclear attack, it makes more sense in the context of the way the movie was arranged. So it's fine. I don't have a problem with it. I don't think it makes it significantly better or worse than it would otherwise have been.
Yes. Christopher, your rebuttal.
I basically almost agree. Like, I feel like an American movie-going audience is not ready for a Deus Ex Machina, like, completely non sequitur introduction of an enormous psychic squid in the last, like, 5 minutes of a movie. I don't think they would be able to handle that. And I think that's the reason for that change to have been made. I don't think it necessarily... I mean, I don't have necessarily a problem with that, but it does sort of really fuck with the potential political message to me in a way, which we haven't really touched too much on the politics of Watchmen.
Right, we haven't touched on it at all, actually.
I could say, I think actually, oddly enough, I think Watchmen is sort of like a Rorschach test in and of itself. I think that, like South Park, two people on opposite ends of an argument can both watch it and then walk away, both having felt like it just confirmed their side of the argument.
Yes, I completely agree, yeah.
There's a lot in Watchmen that kind of just, you can make of it what you want. And I've struggled to try to interpret it one way or the other, and I feel like in some ways I could almost see Ozymandias as almost like a representation of capitalism. And you could say that obviously Manhattan is the atomic warfare, and it's bogged down in bureaucracy, and we're just kind of stuck in this eternal stalemate. But in a weird way, capitalism can save us, but not without sacrifice. Because in a free market system, obviously, people have to have the freedom to fail. So that's where we get in the people who we allow to fail in order for everybody else to thrive, and that's how we can get into sort of a global position that's better than we are in. But then at the same time, I definitely feel like Ozymandias is also very totalitarian and could represent socialism in a very real way. And that's, you know, sacrificing one thing for a perceived greater good, which is really what he does at the end there. And I think that the socialism metaphor works a lot better in the movie without the squid, because it sort of like removes... I think it more puts... What's the way to say this most simply? I think that it sort of privatizes nuclear warfare, so you could say that that is similar to like a free market capitalism metaphor again. But I still think that it just feels more like like an explicitly political thing, the way it's handled in the...
Yeah, I do. I actually kind of... I mean, I basically agree with both of you. I don't have a specific problem with them not using the giant squid, as it were, and just kind of tying it all back to Dr. Manhattan. It's just a little cleaner. It's for the sake of the movie's storytelling. You know, it's because once you cut out all of the stuff about the island and the missing, you know, artists and writers and stuff, that's a lot of dense material that's really... I think it's really cool in the comic, like, you know, I like all the backup material in each issue, that it's really just world building, and it's the kind of thing that you could do in a TV show, but there would be no room for in even a 3-hour movie. So I get the decision to, you know, tie it to Dr. Manhattan, but I do think that there's some, like, key, again, this sort of goes back to the whole, like, I don't know if Zack Snyder understands the source material. There's like some key, yeah, there's some key lines that I think are actually left out of the ending. Like for example, I don't have a problem with Dr. Manhattan being the one like replacing the Squid, but like, do you think that instead of just having New York be destroyed, and instead, as it was in the comic, it was just New York was destroyed by an outside force, but in the movie, it's like every major city on the continent is destroyed simultaneously by Dr. Manhattan, and that is what pulls everybody together, because Dr. Manhattan has turned on them. He's now this all-powerful outside force, and we all have to team up against him. I sort of suspect that wouldn't necessarily have that intended effect, and it would basically turn the entire world against America for creating Dr. Manhattan.
Hell yeah, bro.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it would have the utopian, like, we're all victims in this together. I think it would just escalate World War III. Honestly, of just everybody making America into a scapegoat. And maybe then that would create unity by everybody destroying America through a war. But
kind of what's going on now. So.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think that it's sort of, it just doesn't quite like have that, it doesn't like hit its intentions quite as like perfectly.
Because the whole thing is like, by removing himself from the planet, I think Dr. Manhattan removes himself from America having ownership of him, and he just sort of becomes like this shadowy figure that is watching over all of us, babysitter style, and if we like start getting out of line, he's going to blow us away, type of an idea. So I don't think it gives people the freedom to team up on America, because they're living in a weird state of constant fear. They're afraid that if they do, and that's the whole idea, which is, I think, a better point I could have brought up when I was trying to say why it felt more totalitarian to me this way.
Well, I mean, what it does is the world isn't necessarily living in a different state than it was before. They're still living in a constant state of essentially nuclear annihilation. It's just now they're all singularly focused in one direction instead of at each other. But like Ozymandias hasn't actually put an end to war per se. Like, everybody's still living and acting the same. And there's a line in the book that's sort of like, again, this is a whole like thematics that sort of get left out of the film. There's about the idea of life being circular, and everything is constantly growing and changing, and Dr. Manhattan is a man standing still in time. There's all these themes and metaphors going on, and there's a line in the comic after Ozymandias succeeds and Manhattan confronts him, and Ozymandias proclaims that I did it, I've put an end to war. And Dr. Manhattan leaves, and the last line that he leaves Ozymandias with is, nothing ever ends. That is such an important line to this ending, because the book ends in this very ambiguous state. It doesn't end with an end to war. It ends with everything being up in the air and how it could go in any direction. And that's the whole point of Rorschach mailing his journal to the new frontiersmen. And there's all the lines, the dialogue from the editor, of the place, who's just yelling at his intern of, saying like, just run something. I leave everything in your hands. It's this idea that the world is chaos, and one completely innocent, arbitrary decision made by one person somewhere could have cataclysmic effects and completely throw off everything. That's like the main theme of the book. That's the whole thing of how Dr. Manhattan was created. That whole issue where he's jumping back and forth in time and talking about like all these little decisions that are made that put him on this path, and that's where he is, and that's why we are what we are. That sort of just gets completely just like left out of the film. And again, maybe I'm getting back to my whole like, it's just not the adaptation that I want, so therefore I don't like it. But boy, that sticks in my craw.
Yeah, no, that is really important, and yet it was omitted. Weird. It's almost like the person handling it didn't understand the
I mean,
how strange.
I mean, that is eventually where I'm going to end up. You know, that's where I'm going to keep going back to. But yeah. So okay.
I would love to have a conversation with Zack Snyder, but it would be Thunderdome style, like
right.
That's what would happen.
Yes, I kind of agree. So I think we've kind of Christopher and I at least have sort of beat into the ground our feelings of the failings of this film. Before we end this entirely, I want to talk, if we can, about any redeeming qualities. Now, Christopher, you brought up Jackie Earle Haley as Rorschach, and then you said that's the end of it.
Anyone say, if there's a better actor to play Rorschach, please tell me, honestly, because I think he's fantastic for that role. I really do.
No.
I agree. I think he's made for that role. I mean, he's the right stature. Like, you know, he's small and he's just got the face.
Yeah, it's just like when you reveal Rorschach's face in the comic, and he's like the last thing you expect. He's
right.
This awkward, looking little like.
He's not a lantern jaw tough guy.
Yeah, no, he's like goofy looking little ginger dude, and it's like, and where are we gonna get a goofy looking little ginger like dirty guy who also is somehow incredibly menacing when he wants to be?
Yeah.
Oh look, Jackie fucking Haley, like perfect.
It's perfect.
Fantastic. We don't have a lot of terrifying squat little gingers, but we got Jackie.
I did like it. I did like his reading of like Rorschach's final moment, where he's with Manhattan in the snow and he's telling him to do it. This is thematically, this is something that sort of gets glossed over in the film. This idea that everybody they do it because they're compelled to. And Dr. Manhattan, everybody's a puppet, but he sees the strings, and he has to just do them because he has to do them. And Rorschach is the same way. Like, he doesn't. It's his concept of justice is just we do it because we're compelled to, because in his mind that's what good men do. And you finally have these two characters who do what they do because they are compelled to, and they cannot compromise, and they finally meet, and it can only end one way. That's a great scene in the comic, and I think it plays out well in the movie.
As much as I hate the film, I think that none of its shortcomings could possibly be leveled at Jackie Earle Haley. I really think he was perfect for the role, and he did what his job was as well as anyone could have. I think he was great. And that Bob Dylan song at the beginning is okay.
I forgot. I was going to mention that. I genuinely like that montage. I mean, I like Bob Dylan. I like that. Like, that was a nice little introduction to the world. I thought that was. Too.
What else? Like, I like the Metallica. I hate Zombieland. I like that Metallica montage at the beginning of Zombieland. Mm-hmm. I think maybe a world building montage is just a way to win me over.
Maybe it's just a subjective choice preference on my part and Christopher's part, but I don't mind a good musical montage at the beginning of the film to set the location.
Yeah.
And they kind of use that to tell the stories of the Minutemen without having to rehash it in the middle of the movie.
Yes, exactly. I will agree that was handled well. Because that was something that was not. Like, it was talked about in the comic, but a lot of those scenes weren't scenes that were shown. Some of those characters barely even existed in the book.
Yeah.
So I can agree. That was a good scene. Is there any other positive thing you can say about the film, Kevin? What are the scenes that you liked? I want to balance this whole episode.
Well, I mean, in full disclosure, I like the action scenes. And again, I think it's just a matter of taste. Those kind of things are enjoyable in movies to me. Mm-hmm. And it didn't bother me that it deviates from the book, although I see your points, that they do take up space that should be possibly used for more of story that's not depicted, or themes that aren't depicted, or that are distorted. But it's a fun watch to me. All of those. I mean, hell, I like Rob Zombie movies, so these things are mild by comparison to
Right.
those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But and just in general, I think it's an enjoyable movie just from an entertainment consumer perspective. It's just to sit down and watch at any time. It's a fun rewatch to me. I watch it pretty often, actually.
Well, that's fair enough.
Don't do that. Don't do that to yourself.
I can.
It's just what I do.
I can honestly say I won't be watching this movie anytime soon. Maybe if I ever do like another discussion podcast where I have to remind myself like all the different scenes that bothered me, maybe. But I probably won't be watching this film anytime soon.
You really put him in a tough spot, man. Like expecting to have any sort of balance here.
I know.
like okay, so after we just like vehemently destroyed this movie for an hour and a half, I put on you the expectation of bestowing balance.
Right. Well, I can.
Tough gig.
I can accept like enjoying the action scenes like. It's not to say that I also don't enjoy some good over-the-top violence or, even like grotesque violence and stuff like that. It's just like it just feels tonally wrong for me in this film, and that's the only reason I dislike it. But
not transposed onto this type of property is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Because like I mean, I love a good a good kung fu film or even a good. Gosh, there was another example, and I totally lost it that I saw recently. Some hyper-violent film. Christopher, I'm sure you're very similar. It's not the violence that's like putting you off. It's the context.
Hell no, man.
Yeah.
No, I told you I have snuff films.
Yeah, exactly.
Violent. For me, it's 100% that when I see deviations, and you see them often, the deviations to me prove that they don't understand the material.
Yeah.
And that they are self-defeating. And that's my problem with the
film. Well, I don't know. I think we've pretty much said all we can say discussing the comic and the film. Kevin, you were very brave for coming on this podcast. I really appreciate it. I had a great time talking about this with you guys.
It's been fun.
Yeah, I hope you will both do it again sometime. We'll find something else that we can argue about.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Sure.
Excellent.
Yeah, man.
Well, I think we're going to wrap up this episode. My name is Aaron Walther. You can find new episodes of this podcast at comicdna.podbean.com, and you can also find them now uploaded on YouTube, on my new YouTube channel, Comic DNA on YouTube. I will also be posting episodes on there if you don't want to go to a podcast website. And you can find comics that I write at newhavencomics.com. You can also read my regular ongoing comic, posting 2 pages a week right now, called The Birdlander at www.thebirdlander.com. And you can find another comic that I'm making right now called The Amoral Stingray. You can read the PDF for free at newhavencomics.com, but if you really like me, you could go to Comixology and you can buy the first issue there. The second issue will be appearing very soon. I was hoping to have it there by now already, but sometimes these things take time. But and also I'm on Facebook. Find me on Facebook. You can also find me on Twitter at AAWalther on Twitter. And I think that's all of my little plugs and sources. Kevin, where can people find your comics? Where can they go to give you money?
My comics are available through our website at inversepress.com. Also on Comixology, you can just search for Inverse Press or my name, Kevin LaPorte, and it'll pull up our comics. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin LaPorte.
All right. And Christopher?
So my comics and also a lot of my film reviews, mostly bizarre movies, but stuff similar to Watchmen sometimes, also are on fantasticcrapcomics.com. There's a link for my PayPal if you want to give me money for whatever weird reason. There's also Twitters and Facebooks, and you can also see me sometimes on cops or on posters that they have up around like the post office or the police station. There's a bowling alley I'm not allowed to go to. Also, they have my picture there. So yeah.
I sincerely hope that by pure chaotic coincidence, nothing happens to Zack Snyder like over the next couple of days after you making that joke.
There's like 14 or 15 people out there that if something bad happens to him, I'm probably like an early suspect. Whatever, man.
Yeah.
You know, I have to keep my alibis straight. That's why it's not good for me to be by myself. I got to try to have people around.
Well, I take comfort in that I'm not on that list. So.
Man, I'd be flattered though, really. Like if Zack Snyder went like this disappeared and they like came look, I'd be like, oh great, people have been listening.
Yeah, right.
You know.
Yes.
I take that like a badge of honor.
Yes, I get that completely. Sometimes it's just nice to know that somebody out there knows you exist. I guess that's what most serial killers say too.
Have irrational hatred.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, I think we're wrapping this up. Thank you again, Kevin LaPorte and Christopher Ochs. Thank you both for being here, and we will do this again sometime.
Yeah, we gotta figure out what else Kevin's into. It's just like
just trash.
I need a list. Email to me.
I'll do that. I'll put together a good list.
Thank you, man.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, we'll see you all next time.